Arthur's Family Truth. The notification came at 4:12 in the morning. Not a call, not a text. The security app on my tablet, the one I had installed 3 weeks earlier, lit up with 2 words. Motion detected. Master bedroom. I was not in my master bedroom. I had been sleeping in the guest room downstairs for 4 nights. Not because anything had happened, because something felt wrong, and I had learned over 30 years of construction that when a structure feels off, it usually is even before you can point to where. I picked up the tablet, I opened the app. The live feed was grainy, shot in infrared, the kind of flat gray-green that makes everything look like a still from a dream you do not want to be having. But it was clear enough. A figure moving through my bedroom in the dark. Drawers opened. My desk. Folders lifted and checked and set aside. I did not move. The figure turned toward the camera. The infrared caught his face directly. It was Russ. My oldest son, in my bedroom at 4:12 in the morning wearing black gloves, going through my personal records with the focus of someone who had thought about this before tonight. I watched him for 9 minutes. I did not call the police. I did not go upstairs. I sat on the edge of that guest bed with the tablet in both hands and watched my son search my room like a man who believed he had the right to be there, or had stopped caring whether he did. He found what he came for. A folder. He tucked it inside his jacket. He left through the back door. He still had a key. I closed the app. I set the tablet on the nightstand. I lay back on that bed and stared at the ceiling until the room began to fill with light. My name is Walter Pruitt. I am 63 years old. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, when the steel mills were still running, and every man in town had a trade and a reason to get up before it was light. My father worked commercial electrical for 28 years. My mother kept the house and kept us honest. They gave me 2 things I have carried my entire life: a willingness to outwork the man next to me, and the belief that your word is the only currency no one can inflate. I left Youngstown at 21 with $340 in a truck that burned oil on hills. I drove to Grand Rapids because someone told me there was construction work there. I spent 4 years doing everything: concrete, framing, roofing, plumbing, electrical. I was not the most skilled man on any job site, but I was always the last one to leave and the first one back. By 25, I had my contractor's license. By 30, I had my own company. Pruitt Contracting started with kitchen remodels and grew into commercial work, office buildings, medical facilities, strip malls. I built it the way my father built everything. One honest day at a time. No shortcuts, no games. Every contract delivered on time or early. 170 employees, 2 states, not a Fortune 500 company. Not glamorous, but solid. And mine. I married Helen when I was 27. She taught 4th grade and had the kind of patience that made every room she walked into a little slower and a little calmer. We raised 2 sons in Grand Rapids. Russ came first, then Owen 2 years later. Helen died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 9 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. 9 weeks to say goodbye to the woman who had been at the center of everything for 33 years. I did not handle it well. There were months I barely left the house. But eventually I got back to work because that was what Helen would have expected. That was what Helen would have demanded. And that is when things began to change. 8 months before that night in the guest room, I was going through routine paperwork at the office when I found an invoice I did not recognize. Apex Advisory Group. $37,800 for advisory services. I asked Russ about it. He waved it off. A firm Cheryl had recommended his wife, who worked in real estate, who had a way of making every conversation eventually arrive at what things were worth. He said they were helping evaluate some market opportunities. I let it go. 2 weeks later, another invoice, same company, $31,500, different description. I started pulling every invoice connected to Apex Advisory Group, quietly at night, at my desk after the office was empty. The total was $267,400 in 9 months. I called the phone number on the invoices, disconnected. I looked up the company registration, incorporated 9 months ago, registered agent. A law office in Delaware that existed solely to put a name on paper without answering for anything. I hired a forensic accountant. Not from my network, someone completely outside, someone Russ would never cross. Her name was Carol Weston. She had spent 17 years investigating financial fraud for the FBI before going private. She was no nonsense in the way that only comes from spending 2 decades watching people lie under oath. What she found made me sick. Apex Advisory Group had no employees, no office, no services rendered. It was a shell, a name attached to a bank account. Nothing more. The account was controlled through a trust. That trust was managed by a name I recognized, Clint, Cheryl's brother. A man I had met exactly twice at family cookouts, who had said maybe 12 words to me in total. The money Russ had been routing through that company was going directly into accounts controlled by Cheryl's family. $267,400 of Pruitt Contracting's money, of my employees' profit sharing, of 30 years of work, but that was not the worst of it. Carol kept digging. She found emails. Emails between Russ, Cheryl, and a lawyer I had never heard of. They laid out a plan in language so clinical it was almost worse than if they had written it in anger. Step 1. Document instances of forgetfulness, confusion, or erratic behavior. Step 2. Obtain medical opinions supporting cognitive decline. Step 3. File for conservatorship in probate court. Step 4. Once granted legal control, restructure the company, sell key assets, liquidate. Russ had been keeping notes. Dated entries. February 11, Dad forgot the project manager's name on the hillside job. March 4, Dad asked the same question twice in a meeting. March 22, Dad missed a turn on the way to the Riverside site, had to call for directions. Some of those things happened. I did forget that name. I did ask that question twice. I did take a wrong turn because the road layout had changed and no one had updated the GPS. None of it meant I was losing my mind. It meant I was 63 and occasionally human. But written down with dates and clinical framing, it could be shaped into something else entirely. A man falling apart. A man who needed to be managed. A man whose company might be better off in other hands. That was when I understood what Russ had been doing in my bedroom. He came for my medical records, prescription bottles, anything that could be used to thicken the file they were building. He found a folder with recent blood work and a note from my doctor about monitoring my cholesterol. Routine. The kind of paper every man my age has somewhere in a desk drawer. But in the wrong hands, with the right framing, routine becomes evidence of something it was never evidence of. I did not confront him. 30 years in construction teaches you one thing about walls. You do not tear one down until you know what is holding it up. You measure, you plan, you make sure that when you swing, you do not miss and you do not need to swing again. I called my brother Earl in Lansing. He is 67, retired electrician, built like someone who never stopped working. He drove to Grand Rapids the next morning and sat across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said I needed a lawyer. Not a business lawyer, a war lawyer. I already had one. Carol had recommended someone. Susan Hartley had spent her career winning conservatorship cases against some of the wealthiest families in the state. I made the calls that needed to be made. My doctor gave me a full cognitive evaluation. He said I was sharp. My pastor of 25 years agreed to speak to my competence. 2 of my most senior employees, men who had worked beside me for more than 18 years, said they would testify without hesitation, and I called Owen. My younger son drove from Kalamazoo on a Saturday afternoon and sat at my kitchen table and listened to every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had known something was off. Cheryl had been asking him questions about me, about my memory, about whether I seemed confused or forgetful. She said she was worried. He had thought it was concern. I told him what it was. The 3 weeks that followed were the hardest work I have ever done, and I have poured concrete in July and framed houses in January. I created an irrevocable trust and moved the majority shares of Pruitt Contracting into it. Independent board of trustees. Carol, Susan, and 2 respected figures from the Grand Rapids business community who had known me for decades. I rewrote my will. I revoked every power of attorney I had ever signed. I changed every lock on the house. I had a proper security system installed, 14 cameras, motion sensors, a direct line to a private security firm, and every morning I drove to the office. I sat across from Russ in meetings. I asked about project timelines. I reviewed schedules. I smiled when it was appropriate to smile. I kept building the case. There was one afternoon during those weeks when Russ brought Gracie to the office. She is 6 years old, with her mother's dark hair and Helen's smile. She ran to me and threw her arms around my neck the way she always has. She said her daddy told her I might be coming to live with them soon. I looked at Russ over the top of her head. He did not meet my eyes. I told her we would see, sweetheart. I held her a little longer than I usually would have because I did not know when I would hold her again. That night I sat in Helen's reading chair, the one I had not moved since she died, and I cried for the first time since her funeral. Not out of sadness. Out of a kind of fury that has no clean name. They had already told my granddaughter that Grandpa was moving in. They were rehearsing the story, getting everyone used to the idea, so that when the papers arrived, it would feel like the natural end of something that had been coming for a while. A family taking care of their father, not a son taking everything his father built. I chose a Monday for the confrontation. Not at home, not in private. At the office, in the main conference room, in front of every person who needed to be a witness to what was about to happen. I arrived at 7 a.m. By 8:45, the room was ready. Susan Hartley, briefcase open on the table. Carol Weston, 3 binders stacked in front of her. Earl in the corner, arms crossed, face set the way it gets when he is working very hard not to say something he has already decided not to say. 2 of my most senior employees, men who had been with Pruitt Contracting longer than Russ, had been out of high school. And Owen, who had driven up from Kalamazoo in the dark to be there by the time the room was set. Russ walked in at 90:28. He stopped when he saw the room. He looked at each face in sequence, Susan, Carol, Earl, Owen. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly. More like a man watching a door close that he had left open on purpose. He said, "What is this?" I told him to sit down. Susan opened her briefcase without looking at him. Carol set the first binder on the table and turned it to face Russ. "What we're here to discuss," Susan said, "is $267,400 that moved from Pruitt Contracting's operating account through a shell company called Apex Advisory Group into accounts controlled by your wife's family." Russ looked at the binder. He looked at the numbers. Then he looked at me. "That is a legitimate consulting arrangement." Carol turned to the second tab. Bank records, incorporation documents, transfer history, line by line, date by date, amount by amount. "Apex Advisory Group has no employees," she said. "No office, no services rendered. It is a registered name attached to a bank account in Delaware, controlled through a trust, managed by your wife's brother." She placed one finger on a page. "Every dollar is accounted for, every transfer, every date." Russ said nothing. His jaw was set. His eyes moved to the documents, then away, then back. The first thing you learn in construction is how a man stands when he knows the wall behind him is hollow. He keeps his weight forward. He does not lean back. Russ was leaning forward. "There may be some documentation that needs clarifying," he said. "Some of those payments were structured as retainers to a company that had no active personnel and returned no deliverables," Carol said. She opened the third binder. "These are the emails." The room went a different kind of quiet, not the quiet of people waiting. The quiet of people who already know what comes next and are choosing not to be the one to say it first. Russ looked at the binder. He did not open it. "Those are internal communications that were between you, your wife, and a lawyer named Philip Astor," Carol said. "Regarding a conservatorship petition, the plan to have your father declared mentally unfit, assume legal control of Pruitt Contracting, and liquidate its primary assets." His eyes came to me. For the first time since he walked in, they stayed. I let him look. "You've been keeping notes," I said. "Since February, dates. Incidents. February 11th, I forgot a project manager's name. March 4, I asked the same question twice in a meeting. March 22, I took a wrong turn on the way to Riverside. He did not say anything. "Some of those things happened," I said. "I did forget that name. I did take that wrong turn. I'm 63 years old, and I occasionally forget things and occasionally misread a road. So does every other person alive. I kept my voice level, but you wrote them down with dates, in language that was designed to look like something it wasn't. Dad, and then you came into my house at 4:12 in the morning, in my bedroom, wearing gloves. Going through my desk, I watched him. I have 9 minutes of footage. Your face is visible for most of it." Russ sat down, not because I told him to. His legs made the decision for him. For a long moment, no one in the room spoke. The clock on the wall was audible. Earl's breathing, slow and deliberate, the way it gets when he is holding something back. Then Russ put his face in his hands. "It was her plan." The words came out low, muffled. "Cheryl, she came to me 2 years ago and said you were slowing down, that the company would suffer. that we needed to protect the family's interest before. Stop, I said it quietly. You are a grown man. You have been making your own choices for 40 years. He looked up. His eyes were red. Something in his face had changed, not collapsed exactly, but cracked through in a way that looked like it had been cracking for a long time. I know, he said. I know that. Susan outlined the terms, the fraud charges she could file, the automatic exclusion from the estate under the trust structure now in place, the restraining order prepared and ready, the notification to the State Bar regarding Clint's role in what constituted elder financial abuse under Michigan statute. Russ listened to all of it with his hands flat on the table. When Susan finished, I spoke. I'm not filing criminal charges today, I said. Earl shifted in the corner. Not yet, I said. What is going to happen is this. You're going to repay every dollar, $267,400 in full in installments. We will document and track. You are going to resign from Pruitt Contracting today. You're going to sign a document acknowledging what you did. And you and Cheryl are going to have no contact with me until I decide otherwise. Russ looked at Owen. Owen had not said a word since Russ walked in. You knew about this, Russ said. Yes, Owen said. And you're fine with this, with destroying the family. Owen looked at him for a moment. I'm not the one who destroyed it. Something broke in Russ then. He stood up fast enough that his chair hit the wall behind him. He pointed at me, and his voice came out in a register I had not heard since he was a child. You always loved him more. The words came sharp and ragged at the same time. Always. The one who was just like Mom. The one who got to choose his own life while I was here, running your company, working to be enough, and you never, he stopped. Breathed, you gave me a job. You gave me a title. You made me VP so you'd have someone to run things while you kept control of everything. That's not respect. That's management. The room was very still. I did not answer him, not because he was wrong about everything, because part of what he said was true, not the fraud, not the plan he and Cheryl built over 2 years to strip everything from me. But the distance between us, that part was real, and truth delivered in anger is the hardest kind to face, because you cannot simply reject it. Russ left without slamming the door. He just walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Somehow that was heavier than noise would have been. The weeks that followed were ugly in ways I had not fully anticipated. Cheryl hired a lawyer within 48 hours. She filed a counterstatement claiming I was retaliating against Russ over a business dispute. She said the consulting fees were legitimate. She said my behavior, the security cameras, the legal preparation, the restructured trust demonstrated exactly what the family had been concerned about. An elderly man becoming paranoid, punishing his children for caring about him. Local news picked up the story. I stopped reading the articles after the third one described me as a controlling patriarch who could not let go of the company he had built. But the evidence held. Carol's documentation was airtight in a way that does not depend on interpretation. When Cheryl's attorney received the full file in discovery, the bank records, the emails, Clint's connection to the trust, the tone of their filings changed within a week. Settlement discussions began. I did not feel what I expected to feel during those weeks. I expected something like satisfaction. What I felt instead was the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying a weight for so long that when you finally set it down, your body does not immediately understand that it is allowed to rest. It was a Tuesday night when Owen called at 11 p.m. He never calls that late. The sound of his voice told me before the words did. He said Russ had shown up at his house an hour earlier. He had been drinking. He was talking in ways that scared Owen. Cheryl had left. She had taken Gracie and driven to her mother's in North Carolina. On her way out, she had told Russ that he was a liability, that he had failed at the only thing she had needed him to do, that she was done. Russ had locked himself in Owen's bathroom. He would not come out. I drove 52 minutes to Kalamazoo in the dark. I do not remember most of the drive. I remember that my hands were steady on the wheel and I did not know what I was going to say. The bathroom door was still locked when I got there. I stood in the hallway and said his name. He told me to go away. I said I was not going anywhere. He said I had gone away his whole childhood. I did not answer that. I put my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. I told him about a day when he was 9 years old. He had fallen off his bike in the driveway and broken his collarbone. I had carried him to the car. He was crying so hard he could barely catch his breath. I had told him, I am right here. I'm not going anywhere. I asked him if he remembered that. Silence. I said it again. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. A longer silence. Then the lock clicked. The door opened. Russ was sitting on the tile floor with his back against the tub. He looked like a man who had been holding himself together through force of will for a very long time and had simply run out of it. He said Cheryl took Gracie. He said she told him on her way out the door that he was weak, that he had never been capable of finishing what needed to be done, that she had picked wrong. I sat down next to him on the cold tile, 2 men on a bathroom floor at midnight. He said he should have come to me when it started, 2 years ago, when Cheryl first laid out the plan and something in him knew it was wrong and he did it anyway. He said he had been angry at me for a long time, not for anything I did on any specific day, but for a feeling he had never been able to name, a feeling that no matter how long he worked or how much he delivered, he was always standing just outside something he could not enter. He said he was like me in the hard ways, stubborn, proud, unable to stop, but that when he looked in the mirror, he did not see what I had built. He saw what I had built, and himself beside it smaller. I put my arm around him. I told him I should have seen it. I said I had been building a company when I should have been watching my son. He did not say anything for a while. Owen brought us coffee and sat in the hallway. Close enough to hear. Far enough to give us space. That night did not fix anything. You do not repair 40 years of distance in one conversation on a bathroom floor. But something cracked open that had been sealed for a very long time, and cracks let light through in both directions. The legal matter settled over the following months. No criminal charges, a binding agreement. Russ sold the condo Cheryl had pushed him to buy. He sold the car. He began repaying the $267,400 in installments, restructuring his life to match what his actual income could support. He started seeing a therapist. I started seeing one too, because Earl told me that if I did not deal with my own part in how this happened, I would carry it with me for the rest of my life. Earl is usually right about the things that matter. Cheryl filed for divorce. Russ did not fight it. He fought for Gracie. That custody case is still moving through the courts in North Carolina. Every week it is not resolved is a week I feel somewhere in my chest. I promoted 3 long-tenured employees into leadership and began a formal succession plan, something I should have done 5 years earlier and kept deferring because I did not know how to imagine the company without myself at the center of it. Owen did not want the business. I finally stopped waiting for that to change. Instead, I found 2 young project managers who reminded me of what I had been at 30, hungry, honest, willing to stay until the work was done right. I gave them responsibility and room to make decisions. They have not given me a reason to regret it. Tanner came to see me one Sunday afternoon. He is Russ's son from his first marriage, 19 years old. He had watched everything that happened from a distance, and he drove to Grand Rapids on his own and sat at my kitchen table and asked me what I was going to do next. I told him I was going to keep building. It was the only thing I had ever known how to do. He asked if he could learn. I looked at him. This kid had every reason to want no part of any of this. I asked him why he would. He said somebody had to prove that being a Pruitt meant something worth keeping. He started the following Monday sweeping floors at one of our job sites. He did not complain once. Russ and I talk now. Not often. Short calls mostly. We say less than we mean and mean more than we say. And that is probably as honest as 2 people like us know how to be with each other right now. Last week he called and said he was sorry. Not for the money, for all of it. I told him I was sorry too, not for protecting what I had built. For not seeing, until it was almost too late, that I had been building the wrong thing in the wrong order for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. He asked if we were going to be okay. I told him I did not know, but I thought we were going to try, and trying was more than we had managed in a long time. Earl came for dinner that Sunday. We sat on the back porch after we ate, 2 beers on the railing, watching the sun go down over the yard Helen used to tend. She had an instinct for what things needed in order to grow. I never had that patience with living things, only with structures. Earl looked at me for a while without saying anything. Then he said I seemed different. I asked him different how. He said lighter. Like I had put something down I had been carrying so long I had stopped noticing the weight. I thought about that. Maybe I had. The yard was quiet. The light was going. Somewhere out in North Carolina, Gracie was growing up in a house I have never been inside, and I still do not know what the courts are going to decide. And some mornings that knowledge arrives before I'm fully awake and sits with me until I give it somewhere to go. But I know this. I know that when Russ came into my house at 4:12 in the morning, wearing gloves, going through my desk, he was not just looking for documents. He was testing a theory, that I had become something that could be managed, something that could be repositioned and controlled and eventually replaced by a version of the story that was more convenient for everyone except me. He was wrong. And I'm still here, still building. That is not stubbornness. That is the thing you have left when everything else has been tested, and it holds.